Hi, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join me on this week's video. On this week's video, we're continuing with our ongoing series entitled Recurring Themes in the QME Evaluation. And this is our fourth session. And in today's session, I want to continue and discuss a little bit more what we were talking about in our prior session and finish that topic up. And that topic has to do with the unwitnessed incident with the delay in reporting. And let's just back up a little bit before we get into today's discussion and review the concept of this series. The title of this series is Recurring Themes in the QME Evaluation. And in this series, we're discussing those situations, circumstances, and scenarios that you're going to be confronted with over and over and over again in your career as a qualified medical evaluator. And in our first session, we talked about job dissatisfaction. It seems that many examinees and claimants in the workers' compensation system have some degree of dissatisfaction or some degree of a beef, is the term, a beef with their employer. Well, another recurring theme that we encounter quite frequently has to do with the unwitnessed incident with a delay in reporting of an incident of injury. And we see these cases all the time that involved an unwitnessed incident. In other words, the examinee comes to you and says that they had an incident of injury, but there was no one around to witness the incident. And then to compound matters and make matters more difficult and more subjective, actually, the examinee will delay either days, weeks, months, and even years. I've had cases where the delay measures into the multiples of years. The examinee will delay reporting the incident of injury. And these are two major red flags for insurance claim fraud, and particularly workers' compensation fraud. The unwitnessed incident with a delay in reporting. This is one of the recurring themes that you're going to see over and over and over again in your career as a qualified medical evaluator. And if I was to ask you to review the cases that you've seen in the last 6 to 12 months, if you review those cases, you'll either remember or you'll discover for the first time, now that you look at it this way, now that you look at the big picture of the case, you'll realize that the case involved an unwitnessed incident and that the examinee had a delay in reporting the injury. Now, typically, this is written about and described in the workers' compensation fraud literature as typically involving an examinee who suffers an injury, say, on a Friday, late on a Friday afternoon as their work shift is diminishing down. They will describe an incident of injury that was unwitnessed. But they won't do anything about it until the following Monday, when they realize that they must, or they need to now, report this as an incident of injury. And they'll come to their supervisor on a Monday morning and explain that 2 to 3 days ago on a Friday, while they were alone working in the warehouse, alone, with no witnesses, they suffered an injury. And they didn't think too much about it, so it just seemed like a minor injury at the time. They thought it would go away. They took a couple Advil, whatever. I know you've heard all these stories. But the pain worsened over the weekend, and by Monday morning, they realized that they must report the incident as an industrial injury. Now, when you encounter an unwitnessed incident with a delay in reporting, these are red flags. And because Labor Code 3600 requires that in order for an insurance workers' compensation claim to be an accepted claim, the employee must prove their claim. The employee must prove by a preponderance of evidence that an injury incident occurred, that it actually occurred. Now, claims administrators understand the difficulty that examinees have in proving their claim, especially in situations that involved an unwitnessed incident with a delay in reporting. How is an examinee possibly going to prove that an incident of injury actually occurred several days, weeks, months, or even years ago, when the incident wasn't even witnessed by a credible party who will stand up and declare in support of the examinee that indeed an incident of injury occurred. It's impossible to prove this. See, and claims administrators understand this. So the claims administrator's first reaction is to get out the denied stamp and deny this claim as non-industrial. It's simply a denied claim. Now, there are many reasons that claims administrators have for denying industrial injury. Some of those reasons are administrative reasons. Some of those reasons are medical reasons. Some of those reasons are simply related to factual matters. In other words, there's dozens of reasons that can compel a claims administrator to deny an industrial injury. Not all of those reasons are medical. Well, as qualified medical evaluators, our job, as we know, is to opine on medical issues. Well, when the claims administrator denies a claim for industrial injury, the law still allows the examinee the opportunity to have a qualified medical evaluation. Now, in cases where the claim is denied medically, the qualified medical evaluator's medical determination is critical to the processing of the claim and to determining whether the claim qualifies as an industrial injury or whether it does not qualify as an industrial injury. And this is the whole concept of AOE, COE. Now, in cases where the claim is denied administratively, there's no need for a medical determination. But the law still allows the examinee to come and sit with the doctor and explain to the doctor what happened, and the doctor still has the opportunity to provide an opinion, AOE, COE. Now, in these cases where the case is denied administratively, and the qualified medical evaluator is then going to opine AOE, COE, what is the role of the qualified medical evaluator? See, let me ask you, if a claim is denied administratively, what is the purpose of getting a medical determination? Let me give you an example to make this real. The classic example of an administrative denial has to do with an employee who comes to the employer on Monday morning with a painful, swollen, sprained ankle. And it's obvious that the employee is having a bona fide condition with the ankle. So I want you to imagine an employee coming in with a brace on the ankle and even using crutches. So that the condition of the ankle is bona fide, is legitimate. There's a diagnosable condition with the ankle. And the employee says to the employer, I injured my ankle on Saturday while I was at the company picnic playing in the softball game. Okay? An industrial injury participating in a sporting event at the company picnic. Well, the manager searches his memory banks for the company picnic, and he realizes that the employee was not even at the company picnic on Saturday. So imagine an employer saying to the employee, what are you talking about? I was at the company picnic on Saturday. I played in the softball game. You weren't even in the softball game. You weren't even at the company picnic. What are you doing telling us that you hurt your ankle at the company picnic? So this is a claim that the claims administrator denies administratively because the employee wasn't even at the company picnic. It's denied on an administrative basis. But the law still allows the examinee to get a qualified medical evaluation, to come to the qualified medical evaluator and attempt to convince the qualified medical evaluator to opine for FOR, AOE, COE, even though the claim has been denied administratively. So this is one example of how an unwitnessed incident with a delay in reporting results in a denial of the claim. Now, in every instance of an unwitnessed incident with a delay in reporting, some of those cases involve bona fide injuries, bona fide industrial injuries, actual injury incidences that do qualify as industrial injuries. So in the case of an unwitnessed incident with a delay in reporting, we have two populations of claimants. Those claimants who do not qualify as an industrial injury because no industrial injury actually occurred, such as the employee who never even played in the company softball game. That's the one hand. On the other hand is the claim that actually did occur. The employee actually did hurt himself in the warehouse late on a Friday afternoon. He did actually worsen over the weekend, and he did actually need to file a claim for industrial injury on Monday morning because the incident actually did occur. Even though there was no witness, even though they delayed in reporting, and even though those red flags are present, the injury incident actually did occur. So, can you see the dilemma in making an accurate decision, AOE, COE, in these cases? So, what is the role of the qualified medical evaluator in these cases? How can you, as the qualified medical evaluator, determine if an industrial injury occurred or did not occur? Short of having a crystal ball, is there a way, is there a method, is there a system for determining the likelihood that an injury actually did occur? Or is there a system for determining the likelihood that an injury incident did not occur? And that's what I want to talk to you about here in today's discussion. Because in these cases, we are required to provide a medical opinion as to whether or not it's more probable than not, 51% or greater, within reasonable medical probability, did an injury incident occur, or within reasonable medical probability, did an injury incident not occur. So many times as qualified medical evaluators, we provide opinions either for industrial injury or against industrial injury based on what we determine to be the credibility of our examinee. Now, sometimes when I speak to doctors in audiences about this topic, doctors throughout the audience will typically start nodding their head and giving me signs of approval that I'm touching upon an aspect of their evaluations that they've experienced, that they've suspected, but they've not been able to put into words. And that has to do with the potential lack of credibility of their examinees. So let me ask you, in sitting face to face with an examinee, do you have a system for assessing the credibility of the examinee? And perhaps even in a broader context, how do we as people in conversation with each other, how do we assess the credibility of the person that we're sitting across from? How do we do that? You can generally tell when someone is not congruent, is lacking credibility. You generally can get a gut level feeling about that. But what is it that contributes to that gut level suspicion? Similarly, when someone appears to be credible to you, how do you decide that that person is credible? Generally, you feel it in your gut, but again, what is it that contributes to that gut feeling that perhaps you're feeling but you're not quite able to verbalize? And when I talk to doctors in audiences about this topic, their heads get nodding because they've experienced those feelings in their guts, but they're not quite able to put into words what is the basis or what is the contributor to those feelings, whether those feelings be either positive feelings or negative feelings. So I want to talk to you today about your interview, your face-to-face interview with the examinee, and I want to give you some cognitive recognition of what you already know. and it has to do with the assessment of the credibility of your examinee. So today, I want to talk to you about what's known in the criminal, forensic, and insurance claims literature is known as the verifiability approach. And this has to do with your face-to-face interview with the examinee. And I know you're going to find this to be a fascinating discussion, and I'm sure you'll be able to implement these procedures into your very next face-to-face evaluation with your injured worker. So I'm going to go ahead and assemble some studies and some materials that we'll discuss in today's session, and I look forward to being back with you here in just a few moments as we continue our ongoing series entitled Recurring Themes in the QME evaluation. And today we're talking about the unwitnessed incident with the delay in reporting. So I'll be back with you here in just a couple moments. Okay, I'm back with you now, and today we're talking about the verifiability approach. The verifiability approach, and this has to do with your face-to-face interviewing techniques with your examinee. Now, before we begin, let me just ask you, when you're sitting in casual conversation with another person, whether that be at a restaurant, in an elevator, in a party type setting, in an office setting, how do you assess your conversationalist, the person that you're with, for credibility? How do you assess them for their sincerity? Well, we do this unconsciously, and researchers tell us that we're very sensitive to both verbal and nonverbal cues. Well, it's interesting, and I'm going to read to you from some of these studies, and I'll give you the titles of these studies in just a minute. But let me begin by just saying that according to criminal and forensic deception studies, and I'm quoting from one right here, it tells us that distinguishing truth from lies is a difficult task, and we know this. It says, reviews of more than 100 deception experiments have shown that nonverbal and verbal cues to deceit are typically faint and unreliable. Verbal and nonverbal cues to deceit are faint and unreliable. In fact, correctly identifying truth tellers from liars is difficult to do. And experimenters in deception experiments routinely score no better than 50% chance, in other words, heads or tails, truth teller or liar. They score no better than chance in identifying truth tellers and distinguishing them from liars because verbal and nonverbal cues to deception are faint and unreliable. And yet we're attuned and we pick up on these cues. Okay? Now, with regards to the qualified medical evaluation, it's important that we get our examinee to express as many words as possible, because in our assessing the credibility of our examinee, we're going to be looking for verbal cues to deception. Now, it's interesting because according to this one study, which I'll read the title to you in a minute, verbal cues to deceit are more likely to occur in longer than in shorter statements. Verbal cues are more likely to present themselves when the examinee gives long verbal statements than when the examinee gives short verbal statements, because words are the carriers of verbal cues to deceit. Now, how many times have you had what you consider to be a vague historian? You've had those vague historians, correct? Vague historians are persons who provide short and undetailed statements. Statements which have few, if any, or few, if none, verbal cues to deceit. So it's going to be important to get your examinee talking so that they can express as many words and as many details as possible, so that the gap between truth tellers and liars starts to open up, and so that you can pick up more of the verbal cues to deceit. See, in short statements, the difference in the gap between truth tellers and liars is imperceptible. But as the number of words of the statements increase, the number of absolute words, then a gap opens up between truth tellers and liars, and it becomes easier and easier to pick up on verbal cues of deceit. So I want to share with you a couple of novel ideas that you can introduce into your interviewing techniques in your very next evaluation. So let me begin to share a couple things from these studies with you. I have 4 studies, and I just want to share some brief details from each of these studies. These are published in several different journals. The first one is published in the Journal of Legal and Criminological Psychology. This is a September 2014 study. Another study is published in the journal Applied Cognitive Psychology. We have another one in Legal and Criminologic Psychology from 2015, and then Legal and Criminologic Psychology 2017. So very quickly, let's just go through some of these studies and pick out some tidbits and suggestions that we can employ in our face-to-face evaluation as qualified medical evaluators. So the first study is entitled Exploiting Liars' Verbal Strategies by Examining the Verifiability of Details. Now, key concept here, key concept. When assessing the credibility of your examinee in the face-to-face interview, what you want to pay attention for is you want to pay attention for richness of detail. Richness of detail. It's found that statements that are rich in detail are assessed to be more credible than statements that are devoid of detail. Okay? Let's expand on that a little bit. So this is a study about exploiting liars' verbal strategies. Liars come to the face-to-face evaluation with a strategy, a verbal strategy, a strategy as to how they're going to speak, as to how they're going to employ words in order to convey a favorable impression to you as a qualified medical evaluator. Now, let me read from this study. It says, one explanation as to why cues to deceit are faint and unreliable is that liars cannot take their credibility for granted, whereas truth tellers, they take their credibility for granted, correct? Liars cannot take their credibility for granted, and therefore they have to attempt to make an honest impression. A truth teller doesn't have to attempt to make any impression at all because they're simply telling the truth. That is, liars control their behavior and their speech and attempt to display behaviors and attempt to say things that they believe give an honest impression, and avoid behaviors and avoid speech that they believe raise suspicions. So they have a strategy. They have a strategy to say things that they believe give a good impression and avoid saying things that they believe raise suspicion. So awareness of liars' motivations to control their behavior and speech may uncover the differences between liars and truth tellers. So it's important for us as qualified medical evaluators to realize this, to be aware of this, to be aware that liars and truth tellers come to the face-to-face evaluation with different verbal strategies. From a truth teller having no verbal strategy at all, to the liar having a verbal strategy that attempts to convey an honest impression and also at the same time attempts to avoid raising suspicion. Interesting. Liars may attempt to avoid saying things that they think will sound suspicious, yet this avoidance may give the lie away. Liar's strategy. Here's the liar's strategy. Avoid mentioning details that can be verified. And this is where the verifiability approach comes in. When you're face-to-face with your next examinee, you're going to be paying attention for, as I said, richness of detail. And particularly, you're going to be paying close attention to richness of details that can be verified. You're going to be paying attention for details that can be verified. It's found that truth tellers provide more details that can be verified than liars. Liars will provide detail, but most of those details are details that cannot be verified. Quite interesting. So as you encourage your examinee to speak and employ more and more words, longer and longer statements, you'll notice that the truth tellers use the words to provide details rich in verifiability. Whereas liars will provide details that are unable to be verified. Listeners, that's us, listeners use content qualities to distinguish between truth and lies. Content of the words. Content qualities. And indeed, one of the verbal criteria observers say they rely on most when detecting lies is richness in details. The richer an account is perceived to be in detail, the more likely it is to be believed. And this goes back to the vague historian. You've been face to face with those examinees that you consider to be vague historian, and they lack details. They use short statements devoid of details, and you simply conclude that the examinee was a poor historian. Well, poor historian could be synonymous with the term liars based upon these criteria of richness of details. The richer an account is perceived to be in detail, the more likely it is to be believed. And don't you already know this to be true? When an examinee comes to you and they tell you that at 2:03 p.m. on Tuesday, when they were unloading the shipment from ABC Supply Company, and they were working with their coworker Hector Gonzalez, who just started his shift at 1 p.m., and they were lifting a 50-pound box of pork chops, of breaded pork chops from Sunny Shore Meat Packing Company. He twisted and he slipped on a piece of staple and broken pallet that was on the floor, and as he twisted, he felt a pain in his lower back, and he yelled out, and Hector dropped his end of the pallet and the box, and the account is rich in detail. Don't you find those accounts to be more credible than an examinee who simply comes and says, I twisted my back unloading boxes, and gives you an account that is poor in detail? See, this is what you already know, but it's now important for you to become aware of this and to become conscious of this phenomenon. This is known as the verifiability of details. So it seems that liars are a bit of an information management dilemma. On the one hand, they are motivated to include many details so they make an honest impression, and on the other hand, they're motivated to avoid providing details to minimize the chances of being caught. So they're cautious with their words, whereas a truth teller doesn't have to be cautious with their words, and they will provide long statements that are rich in verifiable details. A strategy that compromises between these two conflicting motivations is to provide details that cannot be verified. For example, it is much more difficult for the police to verify whether someone actually saw a black Audi driving by in a particular street than to verify whether someone actually made a phone call at a specific time. See, a phone call at a specific time can be verified. Verifying whether someone saw a black Audi driving by a particular street is impossible. It's impossible to verify. And liars provide abundant details that are not able to be verified. And I'll give you some examples as this relates to our examinees in just a minute. Therefore, when attempting to make an honest impression, liars may choose to provide details that are difficult to verify and may avoid providing details that are easy to verify. If so, lies can be detected by distinguishing between details that are difficult and details that are easy to verify. And many times we'll have an examinee that'll come to us and he'll provide details that cannot be verified. Let me give you an example. Examinee reports to you that they had an industrial injury. It was an unwitnessed incident, and you ask them whether or not they reported the incident. And the examinee will tell you, yes, I did report the incident. I left a note on my supervisor's desk. He comes in at 7 o'clock. I left him the note on his desk at 6:45 a.m. Now, is that statement in any way possible? Is it possible to verify that statement in any way? No, that is a statement that's unverifiable. I put a post-it note on my boss's desk. Now notice, they do provide additional detail. My boss comes in at 7 a.m. I put the note on his desk at 6:45 a.m. The boss comes in at 7 a.m. That's a detail that can be verified. I put the note on his desk at 6:45 a.m. is a detail that cannot be verified. I put a post-it note on my boss's desk is a detail that cannot be verified. Now contrast that with an examinee who says the following. Yes, I did report the incident. I sat down with my supervisor, Sam Cook. He pulled out the claim form from the employee manual. I completed my portion of the claim form. He completed his portion of the claim form. Here is my portion. Here is the copy of his portion. And these are details that can be verified. Truth tellers are able to provide details of which those details can be easily verified. Liars will provide details, but they'll provide details that are unable to be verified. I worsened over the weekend, and so I came in on Monday morning and I knew I must report it. How can this possibly be verified? Liars' accounts are rich in details that cannot be verified. So we'll just go to the findings of this study, and then I'll give you a couple other ideas that you can implement into your very next evaluation. We found that truth tellers include more perceptual, spatial, and temporal details that can be verified in their statements than do liars. Truth tellers include relatively more verifiable than unverifiable details in their statements. Generating details is difficult for liars even when they are unverifiable details. It's difficult because liars need to have enough imagination to generate the details. And these unverifiable details must still fit in with the theme of the statement, otherwise they may sound odd and implausible. Some details that truth tellers include are too difficult for liars to make up. In other words, liars lack the imagination to speak like truth tellers. Differences in detail emerge because truth tellers who have experienced an event can recall perceptual information experienced during the event, whereas liars who have only imagined the event cannot. Fascinating. So in your face-to-face evaluation, you're looking for details, richness in details, specifically details that can be verified in making your credibility assessment of the examinee. This is going to assist you immeasurably in providing your opinion for or against industrial injury. So this is referred to as the verifiability approach. So a couple of little twists on the verifiability approach that are now making their way into insurance claims settings are quite fascinating and have application to us as qualified medical evaluators. So let me tell you about this one. This is fascinating. How can we take the verifiability approach and tweak it so that it becomes supercharged and super accurate for? And you encourage the examinee, you tell them, Mrs. Jones, I want you to provide as much detail as you possibly can, and I want you to know that I'm going to be checking the accuracy and the truthfulness of the details that you provide me by reviewing the medical records, by reviewing any administrative records, and I'm going to be checking on the accuracy of the details that you provide to me. When you do this and you inform the interviewee in advance that you'll be checking the details, the truth tellers will then pour on the details. They'll flood you with details. They'll overwhelm you with details. Why? Because they don't care if you check and try to verify their details, because they know that the details are correct. Liars, on the other hand, will increase the number of details to the best of their ability, to the limits of their imagination, but the details that they provide will be devoid of verifiability because they don't want you to verify the details, because they know that the details are not true. Now, what's it called when an examinee provides you rich detail and challenges you to verify those details when they know that those details are false? What's that called? That's called bluffing. Many times you'll have an examinee bluff you on factual issues that are simply factual issues that could be verified if you'll only take the effort to go ahead and try and verify those details. That's known as a bluff. So this may be one way that you can encourage even a greater disparity between the truth tellers and the liars, is to encourage them to provide as many details as possible, and then also to let them know in advance that you'll be checking the accuracy and truthfulness of those details against the medical records, against the administrative records, and against all the resources that you have available to you. Okay? And then finally, I want to share with you a fascinating idea. This is being used in insurance claim settings. And we're going to see this trickling over into the qualified medical evaluation. So you're seeing this taught for the first time in our industry. And this has to do with how can we become even more accurate at detecting truth tellers from liars in insurance claims settings. And this relates directly to the work that we do. Well, again, words are the carriers to cues of verbal deceit. So the more words and the longer statements we can get out of examinees, the greater is the gap that opens up between truth tellers and liars. The gap particularly has to do with the quantity of verifiable details. So in this particular study dealing with telephone interviews of insurance claimants, this study is entitled, You Cannot Hide Your Telephone Lies, providing a model statement as an aid to detect deception in insurance telephone calls. So similar to the prior study, in this case, insurance company interviewers called claimants and attempted to get the claimant's statement. Now, again, they informed the claimant to please provide as much detail as possible to encourage the claimant to provide longer and longer statements. Now, the way that they did this is they gave the claimant an example. They call it a model statement. They gave the claimant an example of what they considered to be a model statement. So it went something like this. Mrs. Jones, I'm going to ask you about what happened in your injury, your accident, your theft, your loss, whatever you're involved with your insurance claim. And I want you to give me as much detail as possible. Provide as many details as you possibly can. Now, in order for you to understand what we mean by a detailed statement, I'd like to have you listen to the following statement. And this was what they referred to as their model statement. And they let the claimant listen to a tape-recorded 750-word statement that involved some unrelated topic. In fact, in this study, the unrelated topic involved a young boy, his day at the motor car races at the Motor Speedway. This kid was allowed in the pits at the Motor Speedway, and he gave a description of all of his experiences at the Motor Speedway, and it was rich in detail, but it was unrelated to the insurance claim setting. But it gave the claimant an example and an idea of what a detailed statement would sound like. And so this encouraged the claimant to use longer statements and to use more words to open up the gap between the truth tellers and the liars. And let's just go to the discussion section of this study. Fascinating study. They found truth tellers benefited more from the model statement than the liars. Being exposed to a model statement resulting in truth tellers and liars adding a similar number of words to their stories, which contain similar details. However, these additional tales were more plausible in truth tellers. Apparently, adding words and details to a story is one thing. Doing that in a plausible way is another issue. Liars may find it too cognitively difficult to add as many details as truth tellers, or if they do add a sufficient number of details, the added information may be of lesser quality or may sound less plausible. So doctors, I think you get the point on this. Many times as qualified medical evaluators, we provide opinions and conclusions that are simply based on the credibility of our examinees. This happens all the time. Particularly relevant in the case of an unwitnessed incident with a delay in reporting, where the examinee has no way to prove the occurrence or non-occurrence of an industrial injury. They attempt to prove it through their testimony. So it's important that you have a system in place to examine the credibility of the testimony of your examinee. And the verifiability approach is a beautiful way. It's a convenient way. It's a practical way that you can implement with the very next examinee. Encourage your examinee to provide as many details as possible. Encourage them to keep talking and provide longer and longer statements. Do not accept examinees being vague historians. Encourage them to provide as many details as they can possibly remember, and assess those details for the verifiability of those details. You'll find that examinees who are fabricating industrial injury will provide details that cannot be verified. Examinees who have a bona fide industrial injury will provide details that can easily be verified, probably already verified in the medical records or in the administrative records. And those are the claims that more likely and more readily get accepted, whereas the former are the claims more likely to be denied. So doctors, I hope this helps you. The unwitnessed incident with a delay in reporting, with examinees who may be less than credible is a recurring theme that you're going to see over and over and over again. And when it comes time to make the AOE COE determination, you want to be correct on every single determination. You want to be correct. You want to make the correct determination and do the right thing every single time. How can you do this? Well, the verifiability approach will take you right to the bottom line of a yes or no answer by helping you to assess the credibility of your examinee. Simply encourage them to provide as many details. You may even give them a model statement in advance, as they did in this one insurance claim setting that involved telephone interviews. So doctors, I encourage you to incorporate this in your very next evaluation and learn to master these techniques, because it'll quickly bring you to the correct determination every single time, so that you can enjoy a long, fruitful, and prosperous career as a qualified medical evaluator. So this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I want to thank you for joining me on today's discussion. Look forward to being with you on our very next discussion as well, as we continue with our ongoing series, Recurring Themes in the QME Evaluation. For now, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I'm wishing you best of success in your career as a qualified medical evaluator.